It was a day that would always be remembered.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
It set in motion a terrible war that devastated both victor and vanquished.
I don't know what hell is, but I think I was on the edge of hell at that time.
It has become synonymous with treachery and deceit. Yet, some say the defenders knew when and from where the attack would come. Pearl Harbor.
Beyond what is known lies an unexplored world of shadows and phantoms. A land that knows no limits of time or space. From the dawn of discovery to the nightfall of catastrophe. Journey to a universe of the unexplained, the unforeseen, the unbelievable. A place beyond reality where no question will go unanswered. A place where myth and legend are law, superstition a science. Travel to a world of secrets and mysteries.
It's time for our journey to begin. Today, it's a peaceful place, but only yesterday, blood stained these waters. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. A paradise defiled by violence. Knowledge surrounds these library walls, and with these instruments, that knowledge can be ours. It was one of history's most notorious Sundays. At 7:53 on the morning of December 7th, 1941, the Naval Air Forces of Japan launched a brilliantly planned attack on the Pacific Fleet of the United States, berthed in Pearl Harbor. It began with a rising sun in early morning, and 230 miles away, the men who were just waking up in Pearl Harbor remember what it was like when that sun burst over the horizon.
I was in bed asleep. Being a Sunday morning, I wasn't even going to get up and go to breakfast. However, that changed very quickly.
Shortly before 8 o'clock in the morning, I looked over the side and observed a torpedo plane coming in.
The first thing that popped in my mind was, what in the world is the Army doing up on Sunday morning holding drills?
We thought it was our own planes, and it wasn't until one of the planes pulled up and we could see the meatball, we called it, the red sun on the bottom of the wing, that we knew that it was Japanese.
And I kind of stuck my head around the corner or bulkhead and watched the torpedo go in on one side of one of the battleships.
We started cussing out the Marines for being out there so early on a Sunday morning. Well, it turned out it wasn't the Marines after all.
About that time, another torpedo plane went by, and I saw the big red ball and immediately came to the conclusion that the Japanese were attacking Pearl Harbor.
America was shocked beyond words at this seemingly unprovoked attack. A declaration of war followed immediately as President Roosevelt addressed his nation.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Not only was the raid a complete surprise, it was also a brilliant piece of military planning, a plan conceived by a gifted naval officer named Soroko Yamamoto. Yamamoto's plan was audacious and unprecedented. Under a cloak of secrecy, a huge task force was to proceed from northern Japan to a point north of Hawaii. 6 aircraft carriers were to transport the elite naval air forces, along with 28 submarines. some that were to penetrate the harbor itself. In the early morning, immediately after the Japanese declaration of war, 2 waves of attack planes were to engage the American defenders. That declaration of war was tragically delayed, and Pearl Harbor became history's most notorious sneak attack. The bombs began to fall at 7:55 a.m.
I don't know how hell would be, but I think I was in the middle of it.
I was watching this one airplane that was in my check sights, and it started to smoke and started to fall out of the sky.
Well, it took us about 10 minutes, I would say, before we actually got a round of anti-aircraft gunfire back at those strafing aircraft.
While I was behind that gun and feeling that I was being shot at and I was shooting at someone else, I knew then that I was not where God wanted me to be at the time. My fear was that right next to our hangar was a high explosive magazine, and if that thing was hit, I knew we'd be gone.
About 15 minutes after we saw another bomb come down, like the size of a freight train, and that bomb hit the USS Arizona. When she exploded, it blew all of us forward to the forward part of the bridge, and it just looked like the Arizona was completely engulfed in flame. We found out later that out of a crew of a little over 1,400, only 289 actually survived, and most of those survived. They were blown off the ship.
2,403 Americans were killed that morning, almost half on board the Arizona. The Army and the Navy commanders were sacked immediately. But was Pearl Harbor such a complete surprise? Author John Toland doesn't think so.
About December 2nd or 3rd, American Navy intelligence discovered 2 carriers very close to Pearl Harbor. Now, this information must have gone to Roosevelt. I know some people argue that they didn't pass it on. That is impossible. For anybody who knows the situation in the Navy, they would not have dared to do it, and it would have been a dishonor not to tell the president.
Ever since that day of infamy, these rumors have persisted. Could such an incredible plot have existed? There's evidence to suggest that it did. The roar of battle has ceased. The Second World War is history. Recently, information has come to light that tells a very different story from the one recorded in most history books. And these startling facts require closer examination. The attack on Pearl Harbor didn't take the defenders completely by surprise. 2 Army privates manning a Hawaiian radar station detected the airborne armada at 6:45, a full hour before the first bombs fell. Twice they informed their commanding officers, but they were told not to worry. At 7:39, the planes abruptly vanished behind a mountaintop and the radar was promptly switched off. The 2 privates went to breakfast, a meal interrupted by the falling of bombs. The bombs fell with unerring accuracy, partly due to the prior intelligence from a Japanese spy who observed the harbor from a hilltop vantage point. This spy, Takeya Yashikura, hid his identity by working at the Japanese consulate in Honolulu. He was immediately arrested after the attack, but his legacy remained in the smoking wreckage of the shattered USS Arizona.
It is widely believed by many visitors and even written in some books that a bomb penetrated the smokestack of the Arizona and plunged down through her decks and exploded, thus causing the sinking of the ship. We have found that the actual destruction of the ship occurred when a bomb crashed down through 4 to 6 decks of steel and exploded in the forward magazines. In that area, 1,800,000 pounds of ammunition was stored. A chain reaction explosion ripped the ship apart. It was said that she lifted out of the water, broke in 2 near the bow, and foundered in 9 minutes.
Those bombs that arrived with the Japanese attack force came by a different path, unpopularly believed at the time, and this route is still widely misinterpreted.
One of the enduring legends here at Pearl Harbor, in particular the story of the attack, concerns itself with the Kolikoli Pass. tour guides, sometimes unscrupulously, will take visitors to Hawaii out to this area and show them how the planes flew through the pass to attack Pearl Harbor. But actual examination of the evidence found that the Ko'e Pass story just doesn't fit in with the historical documents that the Japanese put together just after the attack.
These historical misconceptions pale before the shocking charges that the attack on Pearl Harbor was known in advance by the American president.
One of the growing controversies that we deal with here is revisionist history, in particular the question of, did Roosevelt know, did Washington allow this to happen?
Could the American government have known about the attack? Was America warned in advance? If so, why was nothing done? In the first week of December 1941, as the Japanese fleet neared the Hawaiian coast, their radio signals were detected and reported by a member of Naval Intelligence working in San Francisco.
It was on the 6th of December that my tracking indicated that the fleet appeared to be 500 miles north of Oahu. I certainly never expected that they, at the time, would do anything with the information that I had, but pass it through to Roosevelt.
That information went to the head of the captain in charge of the Naval District in San Francisco. He, in turn, told Seaman Z and these other people in this office that he had sent the message and transmitted it privately on a phone to Franklin Roosevelt.
Why would the president risk his nation's security and risk crippling his Pacific Fleet? The answer, once again, can be found in history if one knows where to look. In 1941, the world was caught in the grip of barbarism. Franklin Roosevelt felt that war with Nazi Germany was a necessity, war with Japan an inevitability. But few believed that Roosevelt would deliberately risk the lives of his countrymen, no matter what the cause.
There will be people that think that Franklin Roosevelt sat in the White House and had advance notice and allowed the Japanese to attack the Pacific Fleet. In nearly 20 years of research, I have never found a single shred of evidence that would indicate that.
The dispatches that were forwarded to Roosevelt said, show this to the president, but there's no initials on it. And there's still some indications that someone, perhaps in the United States Navy Office of Naval Operations, withheld this and did not let the president see this.
If you say that Franklin Roosevelt knew the Japanese were going to attack and he allowed our Pacific Fleet, a good part of it, to be sunk and over 2,000 men to be killed, you would have to think him the worst traitor in history.
The information was there. The question is, did it go to Roosevelt or was it bottled up in the Navy Department?
No evidence exists to prove that Roosevelt knew of the attack in advance. But World War II had begun, and America was dedicated to the destruction of the Japanese Empire. But they, too, were committed to their aggressive destiny, and amazingly enough, the Japanese would attack Pearl Harbor again. Only this time, the American government would keep the attack secret. A secret that has now been uncovered. In the months after the Pearl Harbor attack, Hawaii bristled with defenses. America would not be surprised again. But on March 4th, 1942, the Japanese returned to Hawaii, only this time, luck was with the defenders. In a bold attempt, the Japanese sent a huge flying boat called an Emily back to bomb Pearl Harbor. It arrived to find its target obscured by clouds. Changing direction, it dropped a load of bombs near Honolulu on the side of this mountain called Mount Tantalus, where they exploded harmlessly. As the bombs were falling, back in Washington, congressional inquiries were being held to find out what had happened on December 7th. And the admiral in charge of Pearl Harbor, Husband Kimball, argued to the day of his death that he was not to blame.
I cannot understand now. I have never understood. I may never understand why I was deprived of the information available in the Navy Department in Washington on Saturday night and Sunday morning.
one reason Washington did not send the messages of warning to Pearl Harbor was that we had broken the two most important Japanese codes. The excuse was that if we sent these messages to Hawaii, it would indicate to the Japanese that their code had been broken.
Even the Japanese diplomats in Washington were kept in the dark about their country's impending attack, and they were as shocked as Admiral Kimmel when the bombs began to fall.
The Pacific Fleet deserved a fighting chance. It was entitled to receive from the Navy Department the best information available. Such information had been urgently requested. This information was not supplied to me prior to the attack. If this investigation succeeds in preserving for the future the pertinent facts about Pearl Harbor, I shall be content. History, with the perspective of the long tomorrow, will enter the final directive in my case. I am confident of that verdict.
There are lessons to be learned from the last global war. Lessons that cost millions of lives. Many of the American dead from this terrible war are buried here in a cemetery innocently called the Punch Bowl. And, though not forgotten, some of the dead remain unknown. They lie here, near the place where America's war began.
There's one serious lesson out of World War II, I think, in that the American fleet at Pearl Harbor that was supposed to be a deterrent to attack on the United States, and in the end wound up as attracting the attack and being at least the immediate cause for it.
I think there was an idea in America that we could defeat Japan in 6 months. We learned better. It was a tragedy on both sides.
The attack itself took 10.5 months to plan. It took 2 hours for it to unfold here at Pearl Harbor, and it's taken over 46 years to understand.
There will always be the theory that appeasement would have carried the day with Japan. I don't believe that. Hostility between Japan and America goes back to the turn of the century.
One of the misconceptions that was common at the time, and maybe still is, I don't know, was that the Japanese had really enormous expansionist goals, that they were really after American territory.
The reality of war still exists, though memorials are built to remind us not to repeat our past. The men of the Arizona who lost their lives on that Sunday morning are remembered here. Underwater, their final resting place remains, marked by rust and an occasional oil droplet, still leaking after all these decades. Near the Arizona, practically hidden from visitors, the rusted hulk of the Utah can be found. Almost completely forgotten today, it too symbolizes this human tragedy. For inside, as many as 63 sailors still lie entombed, a mute symbol of the bloodshed between two great nations, two cultures that should never have collided in such a bloody fashion.
As Japanese visitors leave here, they leave some memories of a war that they started on a quiet Sunday morning, but they also ask sometimes forgiveness for what happened. They leave behind flowers, and they leave behind a legacy for all of us to understand that the price of war for all sides is very dear, and the understanding and the forgiveness takes years.
Pearl Harbor was a tragedy. A case of the best in men being turned inside out. In combat, there are never any absolute winners or losers, and the Japanese victory at Pearl Harbor only led to the destruction of their empire. That Sunday ignited the last global war, fought to an uneasy peace. We may not be so lucky again.
Secrets in Mysteries presents information based in part on theories and opinions, some of which are controversial. The producer's purpose is not to validate any side of an issue, but through the use of actualities and dramatic recreation, relate a possible answer, but not the only answer, to this material. Air transportation provided by Delta Airlines. While in Hawaii on Oahu, the production staff of Secrets and Mysteries stayed at the Outrigger Reef Hotel on beautiful Waikiki.